There we go. All right. Well, welcome to our August 2021. I had to think of what year it is. I think some of us forget that after a while. August 2021 Canvas meeting. I'm your host, Brett Nachman. As always, good to see so many folks in our community here. Today, our featured presenter is Dr. Jane McLeod, who is at Indiana University. Jane will be presenting some of her and colleagues' research momentarily. Of course, we will have a few updates and opportunities for folks to share resources before we get started with that. Of course, we will have time for Q&A after Jane's presentation. So please be sure to use the chat toward that end. We'll have about the last 15 minutes of the meeting generally we allocate for Q&A. As we're still welcoming a few people here, I want to make sure we have a chance to do a little icebreaker. So if you have access to the chat, you're welcome to contribute to this. So the prompt for today, as we are nearing the upcoming school year and academic year, what are you most looking forward to about the upcoming academic year? So could really be anything. It may not even have to be related to work. It could just be time of year that it is. So let's see what people are thinking. Amy is saying my kids in school. Sure. Alex is saying seeing students on campus, as is Amanda. Yeah, that's definitely a change, as it's been a little while. Kaden is getting back into taking classes and running your thesis study. Good luck with that, Kaden. That's really exciting. Jess, all the stereotypical New England fall things, including pumpkin spice, apple picking, and boots. Really embracing that lifestyle, of course. Love it. Cindy is saying back to in-person teaching. Katie, like Amy, is also excited about kids getting back to school. Margot saying I'm looking forward to meeting new students. Summer, teaching your first neurodiversity class in Germany. That is really great. Congratulations. Kim, also seeing students and colleagues, at least eyes up and neck down, for sure. Eric, knowing my daughter will be happy to see her friends at college again. Oh, so great. Really excited for all of you. I hope it's a fruitful year ahead on all fronts. Well, yes, keeping the challenge on teaching online asynchronously, keeping students engaged. Yes, we all definitely are very familiar with that. All right, well, folks, we are going to transition. We have a few updates here called Autism Network. Then we also want to hear from all of you about resources or articles or news or celebrations you have to share, which we'll allocate toward for a few minutes. And I'm also going to be dropping a link to the agenda in the chat, just in case you don't have it right on you. And we do ask that for those of you who are in attendance, I didn't do this, so I am guilty of this, to please highlight your name, if at all possible, in yellow or whatever color you choose, just to show that you're here. I do document this. It's a good record for us, but if you can do that, that definitely helps me out a little bit. So thank you for that. And I see the Google Doc is now crazy with highlighting, so thank you. So for most of you, I imagine, and I know, are on our Canvas listserv already. So we certainly appreciate your engagement in that space. There's information on how to join if you're not already connected to that through there. I'll mention a little bit about our database in just a moment. But I want to turn it over to my colleague, Lee Williams, to share some updates and excitement on the College Autism Summit front. We want to see your friendly faces virtually and engagement there. And I know Lee has even more to share. So Lee, over to you.
Hi, everyone. You know, the platform that we're using for this summit, which is called FeedLoop, has this this feature where every morning I log on and it tells me how many days and hours until the summit, right? And I'm sure they think this is a really helpful thing, but honestly, like every morning I'm 73 days and 21 hours. It sort of increases my anxiety, but that's how long it is until the summit starts, 73 days and 21 hours. So the end of October. And if you haven't taken a look at our website, I will drop that right in here. We have so many amazing program proposals, and our reviewers are working their way through those right now. Excuse me. And we've got 2 pre-conference workshops, one for emerging and programs that are looking to kind of take it to the next level with Lori Ackles and Jane Deerfield Brown. We have a pre-conference session on developing an employment pipeline. So those are really great opportunities for programs that are looking to ramp things up. And then we'll have our amazing keynote speakers, Lydia XZ Brown and DJ Severese. We're really excited about having those 2 as the bookends for our summit. So if you want to connect with and hear about the work of great people in the autism world in higher ed, please do register for the summit.
Thank you, Lee. Well, I kind of want to have that countdown as well, like each time we communicate, because it further instills how exciting it is for the summit. But I can also appreciate the anxiety with that too. But we do have a lot of great stuff in store. Well, let's also drop in. Oh no, you did drop in a link to the summit. Thank you, Lee. So yeah, definitely get registered, folks. Yes, tick, tick, tick. Until the summit. That's in the chat. So another thing we want to share with everybody, because we're really excited about it, and we certainly were very vocal about it this week, our autism-specific college support programs database has launched. We're super thrilled about it. Many of you know that this all originated a few years ago with gathering information on all the programs around the country that specifically serve college students with autism. And we originally, this was a PDF, and we had made different iterations to it, and now we have it on a very beautiful database. So I see that Dan Berger is on, or was just on, I think, on the call. I think Dan's there. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
Hi. So Dan was our master person in making this beautiful. And then many of you also know Katie McDermott, who has been a longtime Canvas member and active person. And Katie and I, along with Dan's help as well, were really just trying to input the latest data and information on programs. So we're just really proud about it. So I just want to kind of recognize Katie and Dan for their efforts, and to all of you for providing updates to this, because this is an ongoing database, right? So if some of you are connected to or familiar with programs that are offering more services or more supports, and it's not illustrated on the website, our information is right there on the website for you to get in touch with us, and we can look into that and make the change accordingly. So, so really excited about this, and it's a free resource. We encourage you to share it with others. And it's, like I said, it's iterative. So we really are excited to see where this may go, and further providing, familiarity and the right information for folks to make the right choices for them if they are members of the autism community or people they know in their lives. So thank you again to Dan and Katie for that. And we'll drop in a link to that in the chat in case you don't have it easily accessible. So at this point, I'm going to briefly mention something else, then I'm going to be quiet for a moment. This is our space where we also share resources during our Canvas meetings. Are you familiar with any new research studies that you want our colleagues to know about? Do you have something to celebrate, news to share about other people in our space, articles you've read, whatever the case may be? We always want to offer time and space toward that. So the first thing I'll mention is that there was an EdTech magazine article on what do autism supportive online colleges look like. Sarah Gardner with Bellevue College, who's part of our community and runs the Neurodiversity Navigators program, was actually featured in the article. And there are references to taking strengths-based approaches in working with and learning from autistic college students. So I'd encourage you all to check that out. That is in the chat. I'll drop it in the chat now. It's also in our Google Doc. I'll pause just for a second before you, Jess. I just want to make reference that Eric has posted in the chat that he has is hosting a live stream event on Wednesday, August 18th. That may be of interest to families. Focus is Q&A with College Disability Services. That's great. It's in the evening, and Eric has dropped a link to that in the chat for folks to check out. Great, thank you, Eric. Jess, I see you have a new piece to share with folks, so take it away.
Yeah, the lit review on social skills intervention and autistic input that we presented on a few meetings ago is published now. If it's behind a paywall, I can email anybody the PDF. But I just wanted to say thank you to the community, because we were in a revise and resubmit when we presented, and we got a lot of really good feedback and some critical questions that we were able to incorporate into our discussion. So thank you for that. And
congratulations, that's wonderful. Glad to see the community playing a role in supporting that. Looks like Lee, back over to you to share a piece with folks.
Oh yeah, this is an article on avoiding ableist language that was in the Autism in Adulthood journal. Some of you may have seen it. It just came across my inbox, and I thought this might be of use to folks. So I dropped the link in there on the agenda. Hope it's helpful to people.
Great, thank you, Lee. Caden has mentioned in the chat, let's see, just have multiple windows up right now. Working with Dr. Monique Botha and Dr. Ailey Cage, Ailey spoke for Canvas last year, to start the Stigma and Autism Research Network. We're just starting up, but have had a few meetings and are working on getting speakers scheduled. We also have a Discord where working groups are starting to, in various forms of autism-related stigma. And looks like Caden will likely be dropping a link. There you go. That's wonderful, Caden. Anything else people would like to drop in the chat or mention in other capacities? Well, if nothing comes to mind now, you're welcome to do so later. Just pause for a second in case anybody else wants to contribute. Okay, well, thank you all. Lots of things to be very excited about. So we're going to turn it over now to our featured presenter, as I mentioned, Dr. Jane McLeod. So Jane is the Associate Executive Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and Provost Professor of Sociology at Indiana University. Jane has a presentation to share with everybody about the background, motivations, and to the extent possible, preliminary results from the first wave of a panel data of educational, occupational, and health trajectories for college students with and without a diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder. This is very much emergent work. Really excited to have Jane on board today. As always, as we say, folks, if you have questions or thoughts, please put them in the chat, and we will certainly have those addressed during the latter part of the presentation. So the presentation will probably be about, we'll shoot for about 25 minutes and 15 minutes roughly for Q&A, and turn it over to you now, Jane.
Great. Well, thanks so much for inviting me to join you today. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen. I just have to make sure I have it. This shows up a couple times on my screen here. So let me see if that works. Can you see my screen now? Can you see my PowerPoint? Yeah?
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As I'll discuss in a few moments, my background is not in research on autism. I'm a sociologist. I more specifically am a sociological social psychologist who does research on inequality and health over the life course. So I feel like I'm actually still learning a lot about the good research and intervention and advocacy that's being done in this area, and really I'm delighted for the opportunity to learn more from all of you as part of this presentation. So, whoops, Oh, you know what? My screen is not advancing. So let me see if I can stop sharing here for a minute and see if I can figure out how to get this to advance. I'm so sorry. If I can't figure this out, I don't know what I'll do. I'll do something else, but sorry. I thought I had this all set up.
Quite all right.
Oops. Okay, let's see. Try this again. I don't know if this is a glitchy share screen thing or what. I'll try doing this, sharing it this other way. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And I'll see if I can, I hope I can keep advancing this. So I thought I'd just give you a little bit of background about kind of how we got to where we are with the current study, talk about the questions we hope to answer with this study, say a little bit about the theoretical framework that guides our approach to this, the design of the study, and then to the extent that time allows, I can talk a little bit about the survey we just did this past spring, how that went, and offer a few very preliminary results and talk about kind of where we're going to go next. I don't know what's going on here. I can't seem to, there we go. Thanks. I'll start by talking a little bit about how we got here. I think that this group does not need me to tell you that from prior research, we know that although college is not a good option for all young adults on the autism spectrum, an increasing number identify college graduation as a goal. And yet, despite high motivation and interest, these students graduate from college at low rates, with the gap especially large for students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and for women. And this group of students on the spectrum also struggles when entering the labor market, with reported rates of full-time independent employment in adulthood as low as 12%. So despite supporting these general conclusions, prior research on college students diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders is limited in four especially noteworthy ways. One is that most studies rely on small, non-representative samples from single institutions. And while the use of institution-based, non-representative samples allows a deep analysis of what's happening at that particular institution, it can also raise some questions about the generalizability of the results and doesn't allow for an analysis of the role of institutional characteristics in student success. In addition, many prior studies rely on binary indicators of autism and lack comparison groups for students on the spectrum. And I think there's no doubt from national educational and labor force statistics that young adults on the autism spectrum face disadvantages in these domains. Without a study-specific comparison group, we can't really determine how their achievements compare to those of students with other disabilities or their neurotypical peers, or how achievements vary across the full autism spectrum. Third, in part because of the restricted samples, there are really only a few existing studies, primarily based on the National Longitudinal Transition Study 2, that have evaluated socioeconomic variation in outcomes for students on the autism spectrum. And those studies find that, perhaps not surprisingly, that students from more economically advantaged backgrounds fare better than students from less economically advantaged backgrounds. However, because these studies don't have a comparison group, we don't necessarily know whether socioeconomic status moderates the association of autism with outcomes. That is, whether socioeconomic disadvantages amplify the challenges that students on the spectrum face relative to their neurotypical peers. And fourth and finally, existing studies often explain variation in outcomes based on autism symptoms and behaviors, for example, with reference to pragmatic language difficulties or rigid personality. And although researchers have hypothesized that impaired social relations contribute to the educational disadvantages of students on the spectrum, hard evidence for that general hypothesis or for the specific aspects of social relations that matter most is lacking. More generally, much of the prior research that's been done in this area is not aligned with more general research on college success. So to address these limitations, we engaged in a study in 2017, the Sociological Research Practicum, which was an initial online survey of college students at 14 public institutions in the state of Indiana, of which 6 were Ivy Tech regions. And Ivy Tech is Indiana's system of community colleges. So the sociological research practicum is a first-year training experience for graduate students in sociology. Often in the context of the sociological research practicum, people are engaging in a pilot study that they hope may then lead to an even larger data collection in the future. And our work on the project was really facilitated by the director, Emily Meanwell, a great team of graduate students, Emma Cohen, Clay Thomas, Megan Bolton, Amelia Hawbaker. And in that study, we achieved a sample of a little over 3,000 students at colleges and universities in Indiana, with about 100 students who were diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. And to give you just a little flavor of some of the results from that study, we observed significant differences between students on the spectrum and neurotypical students with respect to physical and mental health, with students on the spectrum reporting worse outcomes. Somewhat surprisingly to us, although maybe it shouldn't have been, students on the spectrum did not differ in health from students with other disabilities, particularly students with mental health problems and learning disorders. Students on the spectrum were less likely to participate in internships, field placements, and other career-oriented academic experiences, were more likely to have failed a course, taken a remedial course, or reported academic challenges. They didn't notably differ from other students in how engaged they were with their academics or with the faculty at the institution. On the social side of things, rates of being the subject of lies and rumors were higher for students on the spectrum than for neurotypical students, and rates of verbal bullying were higher for students on the spectrum and for students with other disabilities were than other students.
Hey, Jane,
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
Are your slides supposed to be advancing?
No, not yet.
Okay,
No,
okay, a few folks were
sorry,
checking. Okay,
there's just a lot of covering here, but thank you for checking.
sure.
And students with other disabilities were also less likely to feel like they belonged on campus than either students on the spectrum or their neurotypical non-disabled peers. And many of these differences held across the continuum of autism symptoms and behaviors, rather than just being markedly different for students who had a diagnosis versus those who did not. So we're actually still analyzing those data, but we know they're limited as well, that we only had students at public institutions. The sample, because it was a pilot study, was a little bit wonky. We didn't always have great information going in about the numbers of students at different institutions, for example, and it was cross-sectional. So that was a study that didn't permit us to analyze educational or occupational trajectories, by which we mean long-term patterns of stability and change within a specific life domain. So within the domain of education, for example, trajectories might be characterized by entries into and exits from specific institutions, including the reasons why, if it's dropping out or stopping out or graduating. Within the occupational domain, trajectories can be characterized by things such as the age at first full-time employment, occupational prestige, spells of unemployment, and job changes. So I applied for funds from the National Institutes of Health with my colleague, Andy Halpern-Manners, who's on the call, who's a nationally recognized expert in panel surveys and a scholar of educational and health inequality. We weren't successful our first go round, and actually thought we weren't successful our second go round. We were told we weren't going to receive funding, but then all of a sudden, with about a month to go, we were told we would. So we got ready to plan to conduct a survey in March of 2020. You may not be surprised, given that date, that we had to postpone the data collection that year, because just about right when we were planning to go into the field, students started leaving college campuses. So we ended up postponing our initial data collection for a year. So I just want to take a minute and thank Scott Bellini, who serves as a consultant to the project, Rosemarie Lerma, who served as study director this past year, Elizabeth Anderson and Amelia Hawbaker, our able research assistants on the project, and Cindy Knight, who recently joined us as our new study director. So now the slide should advance. Did that work? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. So what is this new project about? It focuses on the transition to adulthood for college students on the autism spectrum as they compare to their neurotypical peers. As I noted, I'm a sociologist. My specific interests in this study follow from my longstanding interest in inequality in youth development in mental health as a dimension of stratification, and in health. And so when I entered this project, it was really with thinking about autism as a specific lens into the life course of youth who engage in the world atypically. Now, the transition to adulthood is a crucial moment in the lives of young persons. Youth experiences during the transition and their outcomes at its end are shaped by their backgrounds, abilities, and dispositions. There's been lots of research over several decades that documents the life course disadvantages faced by racial and ethnic minority youth and youth from economically deprived backgrounds. More recent research in the social sciences has turned attention to abilities and dispositions, finding that young people with cognitive, developmental, and physical disabilities and impairments enter the transition to adulthood already behind their peers and lose more ground as they move into adulthood. So our study follows from this line of inquiry, and we asked the set of questions that I have here on the screen that I don't think I probably have to read for you. What I can say is that we know from our pilot study that we will have a robust sample of students with other disabilities, especially probably a large group of students with mental health conditions, so that we can extend these questions to incorporate those groups of students as well. So we developed our questions and our approach to answering them, guided by a theoretical framework that draws from prior research on success in higher education, and in particular from models that conceptualize post-secondary success as the endpoint in a process driven by two broad sets of factors, by pre-college experiences and by student engagement during college. And in brief, according to these theories, college success is determined by what students bring into them with college and how effectively students engage with college environments, the latter of which depends in part on institutional resources. So our basic hypothesis is that autism influences educational and occupational outcomes directly, as well as through these sets of factors. So autism itself is something we can think of as an attribute that shapes student success in college and beyond. Autism is also associated with other personal attributes that have been implicated in educational success and with academic preparation. So with respect to some of those attributes, as I'm sure you all know, students on the spectrum have been reported to have poor executive function, more rigid personalities, poor social skills, all of which may place them at a disadvantage in college settings. They also experience higher levels of depression, anxiety, and ADHD, and lower levels of self-esteem and mastery. And those attributes have been associated with lower educational attainment. With respect to prior qualifications or those pre-college experience, students with autism as well as with other disabilities have been found to be generally prepared less well for post-secondary education by their schools. And these differences in attributes and preparation could have important implications for their educational outcomes and subsequent work lives. Success at the post-secondary level also varies with engagement, the amount of time and effort students devote to their studies, how engaged they are with their coursework, how integrated they are in campus activities. And students on the spectrum may struggle with time management and organization, have been characterized in some pieces as lacking motivation and interest, implying lower academic engagement. They may also have more trouble establishing and maintaining meaningful social relationships in college settings. And if any of these things are true for students on the spectrum, this could limit their ability to complete college successfully. So to answer the questions that we posed, we are collecting data through an online survey of college students in Indiana, and we'll be following those students for 4 years. We selected institutions into the study in the state of Indiana that were public or private not-for-profit institutions that offered associate's, bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degrees. And these criteria just omit kind of special focus institutions such as seminaries or for-profit business schools. And based on these criteria, there were 46 institutions that were eligible for this study. We then restricted the sample by the size of the institution, leaving out smaller schools that would not really contribute enough students to the sample. So one thing that became clear to us from the pilot study is that if we included very small schools, when all was said and done, we would really have too few students from that institution to have a meaningful sample within that institution that would allow us to say something about how the characteristics of that institution may have shaped their experiences. Originally, we had 11 four-year institutions lined up to participate, as well as several of the campuses of Ivy Tech, the community college. We lost 3 of those institutions and a few of the Ivy Tech campuses. And that happened primarily because of changes in the administration at the institution from the time we first proposed our study till the time we were ready to field it. And actually just in part because of the pandemic. As any of us in higher education know, it's been kind of a rough 18 months. And there, I think there are a number of schools that felt like even with just the little bit that we needed to ask from them to select samples from their schools, that just was not additional work that they could take on at that time. So we included in this study within each institution students who were in what we call the registered sample. Those were students who were registered for disability accommodations at that school based on an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. And we also then had a 20% sample of the rest of the student population. And we included that sample in part to serve as a point in comparison, and part because we know that there will be students who have an autism spectrum disorder who don't register for disability accommodations. And so we wanted to be able to include that broader set of students in our study. In future years in the study, we will be adding in each year what we call a refreshment sample. That will be a sample of the general student population that is new to the institution, whether that be first-year students or transfer students, as well as any new students who registered for disability accommodations since the previous wave of the study. And then, as I noted, we'll follow a panel of those students for the 4 years that we have funding for this study. So for students who participate in the first wave of the study this year, we'll be following them for 4 years. For students who join the next wave of the study, they'll get followed for 3 years and so on, unless we happen to get a lot more money to follow them all longer in the future. In the final year of the study, because we didn't include students from those smaller schools in the survey, we will be doing in-depth interviews at a number of smaller institutions around the state so that we can get at least some information on the students at those institutions. So we have a survey instrument that we use for this year's online survey, and it covers a number of general areas that parallel the areas that appear in the questions we asked. We ask about sort of pre-college academic background, how many previous institutions they've attended, what their high school experiences were like, and so on. We ask a number of questions about their academic experiences at their current institution, including things that we may think of as indicators of academic success, grade point average, failing courses, and so on. Ask about social experiences and engagements at their current institution, some information about their parents' backgrounds, and then information about their own current employment and their employment aspirations, about their health and well-being, including an autism screen that allows us to get that continuous measure of autism symptoms and behaviors, and then a number of questions about their social identities and demographic characteristics. Because of the timing of our survey, we did decide to include a module specific to COVID, in which we asked students about what changes they may have experienced in their college plans since the previous year, changes in their educational or occupational aspirations, more general questions about how their life may have changed during the pandemic, and COVID-related stressors, their own illnesses, illnesses of family members, loss of jobs among family members, and the like. So the sample that we achieved this spring in our survey was not quite 3,000 respondents, 93 of whom were defined as being on the spectrum. And we defined students on the spectrum if they were part of the registered sample, or if in the course of the survey, they reported having received a diagnosis. And from here on out, I'll just refer to that as the group of students on the spectrum. I should have clarified, we conducted the survey last February and March, so the data are pretty recent. These are some overall information about the students who participated in the study. Students on the spectrum were slightly older on average, more likely to have been in college for 5 or more years, more likely to be men, more likely to identify as transgender, more likely to report a non-heterosexual sexual identity. They were also slightly more likely to report having a parent with a bachelor's degree. And so I'm just going to kind of tick through some preliminary results to give you a sense again of some of what we seem to be observing. I want to caution, we're still cleaning the data. I think we found duplicate responses and those sorts of errors, but we're still creating scales. We're sort of at that point. And everything I report here does not include like any demographic controls and the differences that I report on and so on. So these are really, really preliminary. This is, these are analyses we finished up just a couple days ago. So super, super preliminary. I really finished them up to try to get them ready so I could tell you a few things here about what we were seeing. So just a few highlights. We did not observe any difference in educational aspiration between students on the spectrum and neurotypical students. We saw some pretty big differences in college preparation. Students in the spectrum had lower average high school GPAs. They were less likely to have taken AP courses or college level courses while in high school. They were less likely to have taken higher level math courses in high school and less likely to have taken a foreign language. They were more likely than neurotypical students to have been transfer students. In terms of their academic experiences in college, students on the spectrum, consistent with a number of other studies, including our own pilot study, reported significantly lower grade point averages, were more likely to have failed a course. Notably, again, there were no differences in academic engagement based on autism status, things like whether you report coming to class unprepared or skipping class or discussing academic performance with your instructors. None of those kinds of indicators of engagement differed based on autism status. Students on the spectrum reported more difficulty managing their time and staying organized, also more difficulty maintaining routine, keeping up with readings for courses, writing papers, and understanding the instructor's expectations. But this last set of differences was not quite statistically significant. In the area of non-academic experiences, in terms of curricular engagements, there were kind of no differences in the likelihood of studying abroad or taking a service learning course based on autism status. There was a lower percentage of students on the spectrum reported holding leadership roles in student organizations, but more reported that they had worked with a faculty member on a research project. In terms of some other academic experiences, students on the spectrum were less likely to report having participated in a fraternity or sorority, to belong to a pre-professional or departmental club, to play recreational sports, or to participate in an internship. In terms of the services they received, students on the spectrum were more likely to report receiving study skills, advising, social skills training, and psychological services, and were less likely to report receiving reproductive health care, both from their institutions and from off-campus organizations. In terms of social relationships, students on the spectrum reported significantly fewer casual friends, which we defined as friends they know and get along with, but don't really hang out with. They also reported having fewer close friends, friends they might hang out with or talk to on the phone or get together with socially. They were less likely to feel they could rely on their friends for help with serious problems, and less likely to feel that they could open up to their friends about the things that worried them. They reported fewer dates and were less likely to be currently involved in a romantic relationship. In the area of employment, we asked students about current employment and characteristics of their jobs, and students on the spectrum were less likely to be working for pay. We actually haven't yet finished coding the data on sort of job quality or characteristics of jobs, so I can't report on that yet. And in terms of how students on the spectrum reported having poorer health in high school and currently, they reported higher values on scales of depressive symptoms and symptoms of anxiety. They were more likely to report having been diagnosed with ADHD and a mental health condition. And I mean, in terms of the COVID specific module, as I noted, we had a specific module having to do with COVID related experiences. There were actually no differences between students on the spectrum and neurotypical students in reports of changes to their college plans, the number of credits they decided to take, or their educational expectations. Yet students on the spectrum were twice as likely as their neurotypical peers to say they have become more uncertain about whether they would achieve their expected level of education than before the pandemic. They were also more likely to report that their concern about finding a job after graduation had increased as a result of the pandemic. I might note that overall, students reported pretty dramatic increases in reports of poor health. About 33% of neurotypical students and 42% of students on the spectrum reported that their physical health had gotten worse during the pandemic. The rates of poor mental health were even higher, 53% for students on the spectrum and 49% for neurotypical students. And in terms of COVID stressors, there was actually similar experiences of family members having COVID and losing jobs and so on, but students on the spectrum were twice as likely to report that a family member had died of COVID. So again, I know I'm sort of breezing through a lot. I'll just say a little bit about what we're planning to do next, and then I'll finish up. We are gonna, of course, continue analyzing the data from the wave 1 of the survey. As noted, we will engage in the panel survey. We will be following all the students who registered for accommodations based on autism, all the students who reported an autism diagnosis, and then half of the students who either reported a mental health condition, ADHD, learning disorder, or who scored a high score on the autism screening instrument. We'll also follow an equal number of students who reported none of those things. And as noted, we'll be adding those refreshment samples next year as well. So I think that's kind of all I'm gonna share at this time. We'll see, I don't know, what questions and comments you might have for me. So there might be other questions before this one in the chat, but the one that just popped up, I can see, will we be able to follow students that drop out during that time? We have collected information from students on the best way to contact them in future. So if all goes well, we'll have information that allows us to contact them whether or not they remain in school. In fact, we know that some students will have graduated by the time we get back to them. And so we'll have kind of a different set of questions for them about what their life is like post-graduation. We know that there will be students who've dropped out of school or who've stopped out of school at that point. And we hope that we'll still be able to locate them with the contact information that we have. So should I go ahead and look in the chat, or would you like to?
Yeah, Jane, so these are the first questions
Great.
that have emerged so far. Beth is also wondering if you'll attend or present at the summit in the fall.
I did not know about it, so I would love to be able to do that if I can work it out in my schedule. As I was telling Brett, I don't entirely control my schedule anymore because I'm in this administrative position, but I would really like to participate in that. So, and we should have some more information by then, cleaner data, a little bit more sophisticated analyses.
So definitely encourage folks to drop in some thoughts or questions as they emerge. I'll throw one out there. I noticed that a lot of the focus, of course, is on differences among autistic students on the spectrum versus neurotypical peers, and it seemed like a lot of the findings were rather discouraging or upsetting in terms of on the health front. And I guess I'm wondering how you all make sense of when the findings are perhaps more negative in tone compared to some of the positives that emerged, like in terms of engagement with faculty on research projects, right? So that's an area that I think many of us can say we haven't seen a whole lot of in the research, whereas we've seen perhaps more on, academic or employment outcomes. So I guess I'm wondering how you all make sense of the distinctness of certain findings when other findings are certainly reinforcing what we seem to see a lot of in the literature, albeit this being concentrated in Indiana, right?
Right. Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, I think there's questions in what you've asked. It's sort of questions both about, what we allow ourselves to ask about what we see and about how we present those findings. It actually makes me think in our pilot study, I don't think we've looked at this yet in these data. For example, we also found that students on the spectrum were less likely to binge drink. Well, so that's a positive outcome in a college student population, because we see, unreasonably high levels of binge drinking in general among college student populations. So I definitely think it makes sense for us to find places in which we see real successes in the experiences of students on the spectrum so that we can highlight and then build on those successes. I mean, it makes sense in some ways that students on the spectrum, for example, might engage more in a faculty research project and might be less likely to get involved in, say, student departmental groups or something like that, just in terms of the nature of the interaction that's required to make those things happen. And I think it would be important for us to be able to say to other people, actually, look at some areas in college in which students on the spectrum are having more positive experiences. Now, the challenge, of course, is that we're still seeing kind of GPA outcomes and things like that are lower. And so part of it is then thinking about how do we square that, right? So still, even with the positive things that are happening, where are students struggling in ways that we might be able to intervene otherwise? I don't know if that kind of really answered your question, Brett.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think, just a thought as I'm hearing a lot about this for the first time, I think that's definitely, and perhaps some of our colleagues would reinforce, like the distinctness of some of those findings that are perhaps more encouraging and strengths-based would certainly be worth interrogating even further, and particularly too based on institutional location, right? Because of the variety of institutions in the state and how that and other factors I know that you all studied may play a role in levels of engagement or affiliation with their college.
Yeah. And certainly we'll be able to look at these results by institution and to try to get a sense, because my guess is there's variation across institutions and where we see kind of strengths and challenges that students are facing. And then that leads us to questions about, what's happening at those institutions that's different. Why are students having successes in some domains at certain institutions and not others? And of course, it could be because of particular kinds of programs that exist. It could be because of differences in the culture. It could be differences in the structure of the academic requirements. There's just kind of any number of places that we could look.
So we have a lot more coming in the chat. From Lee, do you have thoughts about the autism friendliness of a campus and how that impacts students' experiences?
Yeah, well, I wish I had more well-formed thoughts about that. So I feel like, Cheryl, as I noted, I think we really are going to see differences across institutions. And I don't know, I guess what remains unclear to me is how much of that really is about formal programming and how much of it is maybe about other qualities and characteristics of the institutions that may create a more sort of open and accepting and friendly environment for students who experience a variety of conditions that might set them apart from other students. When we found in the past that some of the differences we observed in the pilot study were differences that held across the continuum and were not necessarily sharp differences based on diagnosis versus not diagnosis, it really got me thinking a lot about, we tend to have services that are targeted towards students who are identified with specific kinds of issues or challenges based perhaps on a diagnosis or self-identification. And how do we actually think about creating environments that work across the whole range of conditions and experiences students have? So again, I don't know if I quite answered your question, but I don't really know. And that's one of the things that we hope to look at, because we'll have these data on the different institutions, and that we can, I think, also dig into in these smaller schools when we do the in-depth interviews in the final year of the study. Let's see, the preliminary findings on reproductive health. Well, so the sample of students on the spectrum is, not quite 100 students yet. So I haven't even looked at, I'm sure there are gender differences in what we're finding there. Maybe sexual identity differences, and so I'm not sure if the sample's gonna how much of that kind of analysis the sample can support, but we'll definitely be digging into that more. Yes, have I considered ways we could get feedback from the autistic community? Oh yeah, I would actually love to do that. And I didn't talk about it much in the at all in the background on this study, but early on I did spend a fair amount of time with the students on the spectrum group here at Indiana University, but I'm really not engaged more generally with the autism community, and I would love to think about ways we can do that. I mean, it is one of our goals in this study, is to provide information that would be useful, would be helpful. And so any thoughts any of you have about how we might do that? I mean, we don't have an advisory board set up yet, but that's something that we could look into. We could try to tap into existing advisory boards or organizations. I'm taking little notes on this so I can remember.
Yeah, Beth is mentioning the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network as one.
Yeah,
and there are also, I'll say too, there are many members of our Canvas community who identify as autistic and are college students as well. So there's people to tap into, and other folks are dropping in recommendations.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I'm trying to read the chat questions while I write this down, so I'll try to do both at the same time. Yeah. The question about kind of survival analysis, differences who remain in the study versus those who leave over time. I mean, that's certainly something that we're going to be very interested in. I don't know, Andy, if you want to say anything about that. He's kind of our resident panel study expert, but I'm sure we will be evaluating who remains with the study over time and who does not. I don't want to put you on the spot, Andy, so you can stay on mute if you want, but if you have anything you would like to say about that, you are welcome to do so.
No, I think it's a great question, and it's one of the main outcomes that we're interested in examining is not only retention in the panel, but remaining in school, dropping out, stop outs, etc. And we should be able to look at that in our data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really like the idea of bringing in some members of the autism community as we develop coding schemes for some of the data. I mean, we've done some of that work over the summer, but actually I think even more as we move past this initial wave into the ways where we're asking more about, like, why did this happen? Why did you stay in school or leave school or whatever? We can really benefit from that help. So thank you. Questions about experiences with career services. Oh, that's really good. I appreciate that as well. I don't think we asked about career services specifically, and we probably should have. So I appreciate that insight. Any other questions or comments? I hope I caught all of them in the chat. I might have missed some if they popped up, but I think I did.
Yeah, I think I was following it too as well, Jane. Yeah, it seems like you've definitely addressed that. And yeah, this is definitely a community to tap into who has a lot of great resources. So yeah, I really appreciate everybody's thoughts on this front in terms of resources.
Yeah. Good.
Well, thank you again for your time and presentation. And certainly if I'll incorporate your contact information if folks want to follow up with you following today. And
yeah, please do feel free to contact me if you have other advice or suggestions, or if you just want to kind of stay in touch about this study, and we'll try to keep you all posted. Again, I really appreciate the contact and being included in this event today.
Great. Well, as we near the hour mark, just thank you again for all being here today. We have a lot more content in store for you over the coming months. Our next Canvas meeting is going to be held on Friday, September 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Dr. T.C. Weisman from the Autism Training Academy will be our featured presenter. Many of you know TC has been an active part of our space, and we're really glad to have TC talk about the research. So stay tuned for details and the Google Doc and all meeting agenda and all that in the coming days. And Beth is dropping in the chat about a new article that debuted.
Yeah, thank you. I see that. So I will definitely take down that link.
So, and as a reminder to everybody too, I catalog the stuff in the chat. So if you're sharing resources, certainly that should manifest in the meeting minutes. The meeting minutes will debut via email later next week, along with the video recording from today. We look forward to seeing you at our next Canvas meeting, and in the meantime on our listserv. So wishing everybody a good weekend ahead, and we'll see you soon.